Hello. We've probably not done this in a while, to be fair, but we're back. Le Funny Podcast, Marley Forge Boomer Show. Nero, aka Oren Forge here, and I'm joined by James.
Yeah, aka Brexit Boomer, but it's been a while. You may recognise us from a while ago, but we have returned.
So yeah, I might just do this as like a season 2 comeback, really, but yeah. But I don't know. We need to get started somewhere. So I'm assuming you wanted to talk about Le Funny Wagner Group. But yeah, I don't know where to start on that specifically. But Prigozhin kind of dead. I don't really. I've kind of done basically a new project for me as well that I've started. It's a YouTube channel where I'm covering about current affairs specifically, geopolitics and politics, and possibly some vlogs and all that. But yeah, regardless, one of the main talking points I kind of talked about is how Russia relies on Wagner for geopolitical interests, really. But I don't know what your opinion is, James, on the loss of Prigozhin, but we'll see. We'll see. I'm just opening up the floor now, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird one because when you actually look into it, he is a war hero. Well, of sorts. He
War
actually
criminal,
fought
yeah.
War criminal is probably the best way to put it. Actually, he fought in Ukraine in 2014, and received awards from the Kremlin. Went from that to leading a coup only a few weeks ago, and now he no longer exists. It's a very strange turn of events.
I know, strange, right? Like, it's a bit convenient that his plane crashed after just doing a coup a few weeks ago. But I don't know where to start with this, really. But do we really want to go over the brief history of the Wagner Group, or because I don't know about you, but it's always interesting to kind of talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking into it. It's a weird one because I was actually looking up the reason why it's called the Wagner Group. Apparently, it's actually named after Hitler's favorite composer, which is a really, really strange, really strange little fact. Bear in mind, the war in Ukraine this time round. The Russians have tried to portray it as they're fighting against Nazis and the far right.
Yeah,
So
denazifying the whole of Ukraine. Yeah,
strange that they're working with a mercenary group which is literally named after Hitler's favorite composer.
And I've read somewhere as well that the founder of the Wagner Group, he literally made his call sign Wagner. He's called Utkin. He used to be part of the Slavonic Corps, which were basically another private military company based out of Hong Kong. They fought in Syria alongside the Syrian government. And then basically that guy, Utkin, created Wagner with Prigozhin specifically. So that's the origins of it, really. It's I mean, Prigozhin's history is even more funnier, to be fair. The guy's literally a criminal.
Well, it's really weird with him as well because apparently it's been reported that he's got numerous Nazi tattoos, including swastikas and SS lightning bolts and stuff.
Oh, Prigozhin.
And he's sort of seen as the co-founder of the group.
That
so
I did
again,
not know,
it just sort of very hip, very. I don't know. It's a very strange, very strange set of circumstances that somebody who is literally covered in Nazi tattoos apparently, is so-called fighting against so-called Nazis in Ukraine.
Which I find funny with the contradiction, really, for this whole. It's an invasion, but the Russians like to call it a special military operation. But just for the sake of not calling it a war, probably on the basis that if they do call it a war, they'll probably how to describe this? The entire international community will just hate them. But I kind of talked about it in my latest video. My new politics channel. Nero Berio, if you want to check it out, politics, geopolitics, and the world. I kind of do briefly talk about the history of it. So I think for me, I talk about a massive escalation point with the Ukraine war, specifically was 2014, and how Putin wanted to bring in Viktor Yanukovych in as basically a puppet ruler for Ukraine. And then the Ukrainian people pretty much just stood up, did a revolution, and kicked him out. Yeah, it's a weird one. I mean, I'm not sure if you've seen as well, James, Putin's weird academic article. It's on the historical relationship between Russians and Ukrainians. It's something like that. But it's on the Kremlin website. It basically details Putin's whole thought process behind the existence of Ukraine. One of his talking points is basically Ukraine shouldn't exist. They're a bunch of Nazis. I mean, that's literally his talking point when he declared the invasion. So I just find the irony of Wagner existing as well a massive contradiction to what Putin is saying. Like, there's nothing to really say about it, really.
It'd be interesting to see what happens next, though, because the reports are now that, apparently Prigozhin was saying before he was killed that in the event that he does die, there are systems in place for his death, for sort of, I think it sort of measures for the Wagner group to rise up again. So you might end up seeing a full scale coup coming from them soon, but nobody knows what the plans are, obviously, except from the Wagner group.
Yeah. So
that could be very interesting. But I mean, he said that knowing full well that he was going to be assassinated. I think we all knew that, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, the basically, like, I did talk about this in my video previously. It is coup proofing as a method for dictators, where they try and pit other groups against each other. I mean, the FSB's role is literally to spy on the military and political opponents. I mean, we've seen that with what was it, the poisoning of, was it Navalny? I can't remember now, but I remember that happening. Yeah.
There's been a couple of instances, hasn't there? I mean, it was only a couple of weeks ago as well that we found out about I think it's like the opposition leader in Russia, the leader of the other political party, who has been arrested again. Because I think it was only last year that he actually was hospitalized in Germany, I think it was, because it was suspected that he'd been poisoned. So, I mean, it's just typical sort of Russia.
Strong
anybody who speaks out against them or has an alternative system of government just gets poisoned or mysteriously disappears, or their plane just comes down out of the sky.
Yeah, that's crazy, but we can get back to that. But I'm not sure about you, but one video I did watch earlier was by the Associated Press about the coup in Niger. I mean, it's kind of obvious that Russia has interest in West Africa specifically. That's obvious. But I'm not sure about you on this opinion, but I don't think... the leadership of Wagner's gone, but I'd still be under the opinion that Wagner will exist in some way, shape, or form specifically. Either that will be like, Putin will give it to his allies, I've kind of talked about that, or he'll divide up Wagner across multiple groups, or give it to the military. I mean, I pretty much made the argumentation that, we got rid of Wagner's leadership, but the whole existence of Wagner can be given out to loyal supporters either as like a prize or like something to nurture, weirdly. So that's an interesting point that it does seem like we're both going in that direction. I'm not sure about you, though.
Yeah, I mean, they clearly have a massive interest in it. I mean, I was reading about it, and they said, after the death of Prigozhin, Russian social media channels, mainly the Wagner group, who were posting so much misinformation about Niger, have gone quiet a little bit. But then apparently the official sort of Russian channels have just continued, really showing that they've got a massive interest in it. But it's difficult at the moment because I know the neighbouring countries in Africa have condemned the coup and have been looking at taking military action against them, but they haven't had
military
support
action
yet.
Yeah.
And they don't have the support at the moment to do anything, so it's kind of just been allowed to carry on by itself. I mean, I do remember the other week the democratically elected leader who the coup was against has been declared, I think he was declared a traitor.
Yeah.
And he's basically been held captive at the moment.
He's basically under house arrest, yeah.
Yeah, which isn't great at all. I mean, it's for me. I think it's very similar to what happened in Greece with the royal family.
Yeah.
When the king was captured, and he basically just he had a decision whether or not to legitimize the coup and approve it as a new government. And I think the same thing here. They had to do it, to be honest, because if you're in that situation, if you're going to turn around and say, no, I don't recognize it as an official state, you're probably going to end up getting killed. Let's face it. That's pretty much the end result of it. So I think he's just biding his time and trying to appease them as long as he can to keep himself alive.
I mean, if we're talking about the geopolitics of it specifically, we both kind of briefly talked about it, but like France and the EU are kind of reliant on Niger's uranium deposit, and as well, Mali had a coup back in around 2020, 2021. They're reliant on their mineral resources specifically. I mean, Russia's whole point about France still being in West Africa is basically its neocolonialism. I mean, bit ironic coming from them, really. Embedding Wagner into West African states and overthrowing governments. I mean, there's literally a whole reason in Wagner why all the citizens there are flying Russian flags. It is basically, Wagner overthrew the government, if we're being honest. I mean, it's not confirmed, but it's kind of obvious.
It wouldn't surprise me, and I think if it is the case, I mean, we have Western countries like America condemning it and stuff, but it is quite hypocritical because I think we all know
what Russia does.
There's been a lot of regimes that America has had a hand in overthrowing. With its sort of similar techniques to Russia, where they do it sort of internally rather than just all-out military action. It's stuff behind closed doors and secret meetings and stuff like that.
I mean, it's all geopolitics. It's basically like, if we're going to talk about the banana republics in South America, of which the CIA, it has been confirmed in declassified documents, so they did overthrow governments in like Guatemala, for example. They literally had a hand on that just to try and stop Soviet influence in South America and the spread of communism. It's pretty much the same here, really. Russia's just trying to stop Western expansion. It's one of the reasons for the war. They don't agree with Ukraine joining the EU and NATO, possibly due to the fact that, well, NATO's going to be closer to their borders. Unironic, really, but basically the invasion just accelerated Ukraine joining NATO once this war is over.
He's absolutely pushed them into it now. And as much as I understand the reason why NATO is stalling, because I think we all know they could very much speed up the process and just accept into NATO tomorrow if they wanted to. But
it's the
we
weird,
all know why they're stalling.
Article 10? Where if you join NATO, you should technically declare war on whoever's already declared war on. So that's probably a reason why.
Exactly.
But,
I think NATO's biding its time, and I think with everyone, we'd much rather wait for the war to hopefully end before we allow them in. Because if not, then the whole of NATO will then have to declare war on Russia, and that's not going to be fun for anyone, to be honest.
I mean, speaking of which, have you not seen in the news lately that it's Denmark, I think, Sweden, and the Netherlands are going to be sending F-16s over, which is basically what was on the Ukrainian buy list for Western equipment. So,
no, they're doing really well with aid, and I think coming to what we've given them as a country. I was listening the other day, and quite controversial. I think it was our defense minister or not the home secretary, the defense minister, who had gone over to visit Ukraine, and Zelensky, who obviously they've drawn up this list of things that they want and they need to win the war, and apparently our defense minister just said, who do you think we are, Amazon? And it's like, it's a little bit funny, but it is very, very bad taste. Very, very bad taste. Not to sidetrack it, but I think that kind of shows how sort of heartless our government can appear at times. They just seem to make a joke out of everything, and some of it serious as a country defending itself against a massive aggressor, to turn up and basically say, "Oh yeah, we'll help you out," but we're not bloody Amazon. Don't give us a
Don't
list
expect
of stuff.
everything. Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay then.
I mean, it's the irony is the fact of like, what was it? Germany stalled giving out equipment, but that was, what was it? Leopard 2 tanks. But then basically Poland and all that were saying we really need to send this equipment over to Ukraine, and that pretty much pushed them onto the edge.
I mean, they've got reason to, because they're neighbouring with Ukraine, so it makes sense. It's one of them, but they have a massive interest in stopping the war, because if Ukraine ends up falling, it really wouldn't surprise me if Russia would continue and then start trying to push into the neighbouring countries as well.
Oh yeah, speaking of which,
we have no reason to believe that they would just stop after Ukraine.
It's the concept of a greater Russia. I'm not sure if you've heard of a state in Moldova called Transnistria. It has Russian troops in it. It's very allied with Russia. It wouldn't surprise me if Putin's goal was probably to try and invade Ukraine as far as Transnistria and basically just regain what was the old Soviet Union / the Russian Empire. Because he does detail that extensively in his little funny article, unironically. I mean, he basically makes the argumentation that Ukrainians aren't Slavs, weirdly, for some reason. They're not Muscovites. Russia is basically going to be their hegemon. That's his argumentation point. And it's terrifying. The fact that, I don't know about you, but like, wasn't it like 20 years ago when Putin was advocating for joining NATO, and now we're at this weird point where Russia is basically a ultra nationalistic, militaristic state. It's weird.
Oh yeah, I mean, I know one of the big reasons that people don't really talk about. One of the big reasons why, well, that's apparently been given as to why they've started invading Ukraine, is because it has a lot of historical and religious significance.
Yeah, I mean, he details that in the article.
Yeah, a lot of religious artifacts and historical artifacts which are in Ukraine, which obviously, when Ukraine used to be part of Russia, of the Soviet Union, they've lost that once Ukraine claimed independence. There's certain churches where I think it's actually I've like the body or the artifacts associated with what Putin sees as the founder of Russia and the Soviet Union.
Yeah, as in like they're important to like the Orthodox Russian Church. Yeah,
they're contained inside a Ukrainian church. So I think that's one of the other big drivers is to try and get back those artifacts.
I mean, it's not going to help if you're going to be bombing these cities and probably going to lose these artifacts anyway.
Absolutely not. They're not going about it in a careful, calculated way. They're literally it's just chaos war. It's very similar to the Nazi tactic of blitzkrieg.
Yeah,
it's just shoving hundreds of thousands of troops into an area and then just firing bombardments of missiles and bombs. And
I mean, the irony is the maneuver warfare part backfired at the start of the war, where they tried to take Kiev but didn't have supply lines. So that's why we're in this weird stalemate entrenchment World War I style warfare, moving away from World War II blitzkrieg maneuver tactics. Is kind of funny, but like, yeah, it's. I don't know where to start with talking about the war specifically, but like Wagner specifically works in Bakhmut is where the majority of their operations were. They were with the military's threat specifically because of supplies. It does seem like it was obvious the military and Wagner were fighting each other. Putin kind of let that happen because it's a coup-proofing method. But I could talk about coup-proofing a bit later down the line in the podcast because it's an interesting thing to talk about, really.
Yeah, it's I think one of the biggest differences that I've noticed, though, is that the Ukrainian forces and the Allied forces that are sort of joining them. But when I say that, obviously, it's not official forces from our countries, but we've had a lot of people, especially from Britain as well, who've decided just to independently go over there and fight. But what I've noticed anyway, is that the Ukrainian forces tend to have a much more modernized approach. They're using very high technological equipment like drones is one of the biggest things that's been in the news, and that's worked out really well for them. I mean, they had a sea drone that took out an entire Russian destroyer. which is crazy, and you've even seen how the drones that flew all the way to Moscow to try and blow up the Kremlin, and I think that is the big difference that's helping Ukrainians at the moment, as Russia's still sort of set in this old style of war where
Cold War warfare,
just numbers. We have hundreds of tanks, we have hundreds of thousands of soldiers with it, and I think they're just playing the numbers game. But you look at the casualties wise, and Russia does have the numbers casualties wise, and it's really not worked out for him so far.
I mean, there's a known reality with Russia. It was mentioned in a BBC article specifically about casualties where the Russian state or the Soviet Union, specifically in World War II, would be trying to downplay the casualties specifically. So there are estimates from the BBC counting something in the thousands versus what Russia is saying is probably in the thousands but less. It's like how one Russian widow was going to specifically to the records office to figure out what happened with his husband or his son. Didn't get anything from them, but yeah, Russia's trying to hide the casualty numbers, probably for morale reasons specifically. But I mean, Russian state media just in general downplays the war entirely, saying it's a success. But really, I guarantee you now, Russian citizens don't know the actual reality of what's going on.
No, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, I don't think there's a lot of true information being given out to Russian citizens in general, not just about the war.
Yeah.
But again, with this whole sort of discord about they're fighting against a rise in Nazism, which is completely wrong. But I think there's a fair amount of the Russian population who actually believe that, because that's all that they're hearing from their government and from their soldiers, which is a very dangerous place to be in Russia, with all the misinformation. But I think for me, comparing it to sort of World War II, when the Nazis were trying to invade Russia, one of the reasons why they lost was because trying to fight against a country that's defending itself, especially when you're an aggressor who brutally treats captured soldiers and citizens and stuff like that, you're almost always going to lose. And it's similar now with Ukraine, where they literally have nothing to lose, except from everything. So that they won't stop for anything. Whereas Russian soldiers, and a big portion of them are conscripts, they don't want to be there. They don't really have any reason to be fighting Ukrainians. So just from the willpower sort of stance, it's always going to be difficult for Russia to beat the Ukrainian forces, because the vast majority of them, I would say, don't want it as much as Ukrainians want to defend their country.
Yeah, and then you have to remember as well that Ukrainian troops are also on their own home turf, so they'll know exactly about the terrain, the guerrilla warfare, how to actually fight the Russians, hit and run tactics, etc. Russia will be basically going into it blind. It's basically the same as when Russia was the Soviet Union and invaded Afghanistan. They didn't know what the hell they were doing.
And a bit similar to America's sort of fighting in Vietnam. You always find that the locals have an upper hand, which is logically correct anyway. But it is because they know the area, and even the smallest of things that you sort of see, a bit like Britain when we thought we were going to be invaded in the 1940s. Stuff like destroying street signs and railway signs, and I'm assuming the Ukrainians will have done the same. So even if Russians, are using maps and stuff like that, it's still difficult for them to know where they are, because all of the signage has just been completely destroyed. So I think that the Ukrainians at this point, I do think, have the upper hand with all of the aid that's behind them and the technology and the willpower. I think Russia has very quickly lost its upper hand in this. It'll be interesting to see what they do next in regards to the Ukrainian war, because it can't stay the way it is at the moment, or else I do believe they will lose.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'm personally interested about, probably just due to the fact that I'm a Filipino, is I'm interested in how China is looking at this war and how closely they are, because obviously there's the whole situation with Taiwan. or as the CCP would call it, Chinese Taipei. They claim it's basically a rogue province. But yeah, they're probably looking at this war very closely, just to see what's happening, because the way the international community will obviously react to the war is a way that China can play off of, and they can find a way to, mess about with Taiwan. That's usually what's going to happen here, just based on the geopolitics of it. I mean, for example, if we're looking at the United States being focused more on Ukraine and less on, like, let's say, the South China Sea or the Pacific in general, China will probably try and take advantage of that. Like, it's something that just will happen.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they've got a massive interest in Taiwan. Because I think it's what is it now? I think it's sort of like computer chips. The vast majority of computer
superconductors.
Chips,
yeah.
Yeah, they're all made in Taiwan, out of that tiny little area.
And that probably will be something I want to cover down the line on my channel, specifically, because that is one way that Taiwan maintains its influence around the globe. I mean, if you think about it, with superconductors, chips, etc., all of that is needed in computer technology, all of that is needed in military hardware. So let's say you're developing new tanks or something, that's something you're going to be relying on Taiwan for. It's the one thing that kind of keeps them relevant on the world stage. And it's probably why the United States has an interest, and why China kind of can't really flatten them per se. But yeah, I guarantee you now that, like, an invasion of Taiwan will probably cause another global chip shortage, which we kind of did see a few years back. But as in, like, you can't probably get a new computer. But,
no more gaming.
No more gaming. No more games. No more League. Sad. No Baldur's Gate 3. But, yeah, I'm wondering where to go from here. I do want to talk about coup-proofing a bit, unless you have something to talk about, James.
No, go for it.
Right, so one thing I've been looking at specifically is there's an amazing article by Sudath. I did cite it as a source, so you can probably check out the Google document for it if you are listening. But basically, it details extensively how one thing that military dictatorships in general rely on is, in essence, yes, they do rely on a strong military. For example, I mean, Nazi Germany was literally an authoritarian state, but they also had a strong military. But it does talk about how these groups are, specifically as dictators, want to try and stop military officers, for example, to try and cause coups. I mean, we saw that with, like, Gaddafi, we saw that with Saddam Hussein. So one thing it talks about extensively is, I did speak about it previously, was intelligence organizations that do spy on opponents as well as politicians and keeping others in check. But it does mention paramilitary groups as well, for example. I mean, I did mention this, but, like, the SS, for example, pretty powerful paramilitary group in parallel with the Wehrmacht. It was literally there to stop coups. Probably another reason why the SS also got rid of the SA early on, before the Nazis came to power. It's basically all about trying to maintain power and loyalty. I mean, yeah, that's a terrifying aspect that I think about with the FSB specifically. It's not necessarily just a spy organization, but it also is one that can be seen as like a paramilitary group that, can be anywhere and everywhere. The same really with Wagner, before they still technically do exist, but the question would be, what's going to happen with them? Will they collapse? I personally am under the opinion no, they'll exist in some form or multiple forms. One thing this article did mention as well was, if you have multiple competing organizations that are divided and they are spying on each other, that is something that someone like Putin can take advantage of. So it wouldn't surprise me if Wagner in some way, shape or form is divided up, let's say like 5-10 times in terms of fighters. I mean, Wagner could be divided based up on country, region, etc. in Africa. Something that could happen. But it's just an interesting theory I have about what's going to happen with Wagner specifically.
Like I said, I mean, we've heard about these apparent sort of contingency plans.
Yeah.
If the Wagner leader dies, but it's not just him. I think it's a deputy leader as well, and
Yeah.
a couple of other high-ranking Wagner officials. So, I mean, it'd be interesting to see what happens now, because say, for example, the Wagner Group doesn't, fight against the Russian sort of government now, and they don't do a coup, which would be like the extreme response. But say they just refuse to continue fighting alongside them. That would make a massive, massive difference to the war in Ukraine. Not just numbers wise, but also technology wise, because the Wagner Group does tend to have a lot of very high tech equipment and vehicles that the Russian government does use.
I mean, we did see in the coup, like, for example, tanks rolling down streets and armored fighting vehicles. I mean, it's just a weird one to talk about, really, because what really is the question is, where does Wagner go from here without its leadership?
Absolutely. Do they have the numbers to overthrow the Russian leadership?
Yeah.
Who knows? Who knows?
I mean, it's estimated that they have around 1,000 fighters in Mali specifically, same number in around Niger specifically. I mean, it's also amusing as well that the government in Niger, the military junta, when they did kick out the French and the UN peacekeepers, they were replaced by Wagner fighters. But in essence, what it was ratio-wise was, let's say, there was one Wagner fighter to 10 French troops. So, I mean, as well as the Americans getting kicked out there specifically, the reason France was there as well as the US was they were fighting Islamist groups. They were fighting ISIS. They were fighting Al-Qaeda specifically. And then, obviously, what this military junta does in Niger is going to be dependent on what Russia also does as well. It is said in the news in the BBC that it is a very unstable country at the moment. The northern regions do have separatists. They do have Al-Qaeda just existing in the desert as well as ISIS. So that's going to pose more questions to what Putin wants to do in Africa specifically, because he is specifically there for resources. France's main interest specifically is obviously going to be those uranium deposits that they specifically really want in Niger. They're reliant. The EU and France are heavily reliant on Niger's uranium deposits just on the basis of nuclear power. So that's something to look about for specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting to see where that's going to go, because as I mentioned before, there is, the sort of community of the neighbouring countries down there who absolutely condemn the coup and want to take military action, but at the present time, they don't have the numbers or the support to do anything. So, if they do get that support, that could end up becoming a massive, massive issue down there. It may end up, seeing a civil war breaking out.
Yeah.
But then also a war across the other countries as well who get involved.
And that's something I'm really fascinated about, because obviously, if a group like ECOWAS is considering military action, it wouldn't surprise me if the United States or France wants to get involved, or even the EU as a whole with military action. I mean, we did see France beforehand with countries like in the Sahel as well, which is what Niger and Mali are part of. It's a well-known unstable region. But basically, what happened was France did do military intervention in the Central African Republic a while back. Basically, a military dictator, through a coup. Then he got overthrown by the French government specifically. But the fact here is Russia's going to have a bigger role in this if there is some form of military intervention. Does that divide resources for Ukraine? Does that put Wagner more in an extensive role despite losing their leadership? That is something to look out for, because Russia's main interest is obviously going to be trying to keep this military government in power in Niger specifically.
Absolutely, because I mean they're much more likely to be sympathetic to Russian Russian principles than a democratically elected government.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, Wagner also has its fingers in Mali as well. Specifically, that is another country that is at odds with ECOWAS specifically. That also does seem to be a country as well that is willing to back Niger specifically. There are other states where there are like, I mean, this is the history we'll run about. It's a very unstable region. It is known for its military coups specifically. So that's something to look out for. I mean, I just genuinely think ECOWAS in general, probably a leader in the region like Nigeria, is probably going to be trying to lead ECOWAS into some form of military intervention, probably backed by the US and France. Countries like Burkina Faso, Niger and Mali are probably going to try and back each other here. So it's something to look out for. It might be something that might destabilize the region further. So that's something to be worried about specifically. I mean, when we look at destabilization like the Middle East specifically, groups like ISIS did take advantage of that as well. I mean, it's probably why ISIS had the size of England or the UK specifically, which is something that's a terrifying thought. But yeah, that's my kind of in general geopolitical take on it. There's nothing really, not much to say about Africa in general. But I'm not sure if you have anything further to say, because I'm pretty much out on that now.
Yeah, I think I'm the same, to be honest. It's just, I think it's just one of them where we've got to sort of keep our eye on it and see how it develops. Very similar to the Russia-Ukraine situation. It's one of them where I think we've sort of talked about as much as we can for now, but I think there's definitely going to be some interesting developments in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, so I guess with like this episode for season 2, we'll probably leave it at that then. So yeah, I'll guess we'll be wrapping this up then. All right, see you.
Perfect. All right.